Good to see you.
It's good to see you. How bad?
My leg's broken. My back feels kind of weird.
Gotta get you out of here, buddy. Pulling him out. Cover.
Wait, Ah! Ah!
Put you down. C2, we're at the 6-4 crash site, securing perimeter.
Roger that.
You all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
You're locked and loaded. Any skitties come around these corners, you watch our backs.
Hey, where's the rescue squad?
We're it.
Loading!
Iandoli of Engaging the Phenomenon and Jay King of the Experiencer Group. Now, let's dive in. Welcome to the end of Contact Week, and James Iandoli came up with the idea. It was from the 12th to the 18th. And I know, James, you've been having many videos on this topic, and that's been great. And so I guess I'll start the panel with a question. So as we all know, the Gillibrand-Rubio amendment is about to pass. It's supposed to pass before Christmas. And there's a lot of provisions in that amendment that are going to take us to a new phase as it pertains to UAP, whether it's the scientific plan for studying and coming up with theories as to how UAP operate, or the rapid response team that's going to be constructed for actual people to go out into the field quickly when there's been UAP reports. They're asking for information on UAP encounters in proximity of nuclear facilities. They're asking for any information on biological effects people have had when they've encountered UAP. There's even going to be coordination amongst allies to discuss this issue. And they're even asking for any information on exploitation of UAP, suggesting crash retrievals. So this is a pretty big deal. So my question is, since December 16, 2017, when the New York Times article was published, I think collectively, journalistically, we've been mostly focusing on the technology itself. But right before the Gillibrand Amendment passes and going into that new phase of this process that's been ensuing for the past 4 years, when do you think the question is going to become more central of who exactly is behind the wheel of this technology? And I'll give this to Richard Dolan first.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Robbie. The weird thing is, I think you hit the exactly correct point. It's like in the last 4 years, we were so thrilled and excited that we got any kind of love at all from the media, any kind of acknowledgement of the UFO reality, that we were, and I think really easily guided into this conversation about, oh, well, what else does the Navy have? And are we going to have disclosure? And, and that's all that's important. But a lot of things have gotten lost in the shuffle. One is the deep, deep nature of the cover-up, things like crash retrievals and the like. But the other, which you're referring to, is contact. I mean, that just gets completely brushed aside, it seems to me. And it's so important. And, we're dealing, it's easy for us to forget, we are dealing with an intelligence that is operating here. Whether they have intentions that we would consider good or not, we don't really know for sure, but they're doing everything they are by stealth, and they are definitely having a major impact on our society, if covertly. And we don't have any conversation about this whatsoever. So that's a discussion that needs to happen in a broader context. I mean, UFO researchers talk about it enough, but the broader public, the general public, is just not there yet, and it would be a good idea to get people there.
What about you, James? When do you think this is going to enter the zeitgeist in the conversation? Because I just don't think the Gillibrand-Rubio amendment passing can do so without elevating this topic into the mainstream. I've heard that there's going to be more 60-minute segments on this issue, and when the NDA finally gets signed by Joe Biden, I think there'll be an onslaught of new coverage, because this new office might be funded over $1 billion. Some have speculated that it will reach into that territory, and it's inevitable that the UFO topic has to become more saturated in our conversation. So when do you think, James, the issue of who's behind the wheel will take greater priority in the discussion, journalistically and otherwise?
Yeah, I think for the mainstream conversation to get there, we still have, I think still the UFO reality is still sinking in for people, the general public. You still see people debunking and being skeptical to the extent where it's still pretty silly. And again, the contact question, right? The idea of contact, I think those are some of the most fundamental questions that people have about the UFO phenomenon. Even people not into the subject, I think their genuine curiosity is like, okay, if UFOs are real, who are they? What are they doing here? And that kind of thing. What are their intentions? So I think it has a way to go. To be in the mainstream thing. I think we're going to see probably articles that address it here and there, but I think we're still in a way codependent in a way for that kind of disclosure moment. I think when there's like an official disclosure, and I hate to say that because what's out there is already, in my opinion, enough for any rational thinking person to say, okay, UFOs are real. But I still don't think that has completely clicked with the world, where you have somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson, coming out and just dismissing it completely. But then again, you have people like Michio Kaku, who's super supportive of it, and he's asking the right questions and using the right frameworks. So in kind of like, I guess, a realist perspective, I think it's going to take a while for the conversation to centralize there. I think we're going to see threads of it, but I don't think the conversation of contact being like a central idea is not going to be there for a few years unless there's some kind of event that takes place, where a whistleblower comes forward with that's talking specifically about entities and bodies and something along those lines. I think it's going to take a big event to bring that to the forefront. Mass sighting, something like that. But even then, I can see it being talked about for a little while, and then kind of we're still going to go back to this UAPs real kind of military interaction thing.
Jay, what's your take?
Well, thanks. And I really appreciate being here. I think, it's an amazing week to be talking about this. Here we are 4 years yesterday since that initial Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, Helene Cooper front page article in the New York Times. And, as Ryan, you put it, the defense bill has this new UFO office. And so within 4 years, that's pretty amazing, but there's still so much work to do, right? And I personally know of two large-scale media projects that are going to be coming out in the next year that even just in and of themselves, one is from a very major news network. I'm sure some of us probably know about that project. And, I think that from what I've heard and from the talking heads that have been involved in some of that stuff, or the contacts that have been made that way, that there is going to be a little bit more talk about occupants even within this next year, right? But that's the thing, right? In choosing to use a word like occupants, we're recognizing that there have been several waves of this already. 50 years ago, at the end of the 60s, we had within our field, there was a whole acknowledgement, okay, occupants. We don't want to say aliens, we want to say occupants. Where are we going to go from there? And then by the end of the 70s, a lot of people recoiled from that. And then they wanted to kind of focus through the telescope again and get away from the idea of contact. And then people like Whitley Strieber and Bud Hopkins and John Mack came along about 30 years ago, and they started bringing it to the fore again. Like, this is what they look like. These are big. And again, there's a squeamishness on the part of the community, our community, that really kind of stymied things in a lot of ways, because there were people like Steven Spielberg that were perfectly willing way back in 1977 to say, like, look, here they are, and I'll make a whole movie about it, and so I think one thing that we need to get over within the situation is looking at a taxonomy and getting away from the telescope, getting away from the FLIR videos and getting into the cases. Richard did an amazing job with his book, The Alien Agendas, just last year, in terms of saying, here are six distinct types that I found, that are right here, right now, that there's just overwhelming anecdotal accounts of, and let's go with that. Let's move through that. And I think that those kinds of taxonomies, those kinds of structures, what Richard was doing right there, are incredibly important for getting people kind of through the squeamishness and actually into looking at who's the there, if that makes sense.
All right, I'm gonna ask kind of a weird question and see how you guys deal with it. So I've heard there's a Whitley Strieber's had an explanation that he at one point discussed, as far as I can tell, as to why there is a cover-up. He has stated, from what I've heard, someone that I think is knowledgeable told me this, hopefully is correct. He has stated that according to a high-ranking military officer he talked to, the government used the cover-up and the dismissal of UFOs as a way to prevent them to have a wider access to our reality, suggestive of that. If as Stephen Bass likes to call it, if the truth embargo was removed, obviously this topic would saturate the earth on every level, scientifically, journalistically, academically. Our history books would be rewritten. Even the curriculum in our middle schools and high schools would be altered, because obviously if we have non-human intelligence engaging our planet, that's something that's worth discussing, to say the least. Do any of you think that the magnification of this topic, 7+ billion of us, could somehow influence the phenomenon itself to interact with us in a way that it never has previously? And I'll give that to Richard Dillon first.
Oh, it's an interesting question. And I don't recall if I remember hearing what they said. I believe it. I just I didn't remember that one. And by the way, thanks, Jay, for the shout out for my book. Appreciate that. I think that I do believe there are multiple groups that are here.
be honest about
Right now, for us, it is. Right.
and you're saying it's possible to separate, but I would venture to say that you wouldn't, that those are coupled. So
indicate the existence of an alien or something. I mean, unless we are the aliens, we could have been contamination from some rocket ship that hit here a long time ago, and all evidence of it has been destroyed. But again, that alien would have started out somewhere. They're not here watching us right now, right? They're not among us. And so, though there are potential explanations for the Fermi paradox, and one of them that I kind of like is that the truly intelligent creatures are those that decided not to colonize the whole galaxy because they'd quickly run out of room there because it's exponential, right? You send a probe to a planet, it makes 2 copies, they go out, they make 2 copies each, and it's an exponential, right? They quickly colonize the whole galaxy. But then the distance to the next galaxy, the next big one, like Andromeda, that's 2.5 million light years.
Yeah.
That's a much grander scale now, right? And so it also could, the reason they survived this long is that they got over this tendency that may well exist among sufficiently intelligent creatures, this tendency for aggression and self-destruction, right? If they bypass that, and that may be one of the great filters if there are more than one, right? Then they may not be a type of creature that feels the need to go and say, oh, there's a nice looking planet, and there's a bunch of ants on it. Let's go squish them and colonize it. No, it could even be the kind of Star Trek-like prime directive where you go and explore worlds, but you don't interfere in any way. Right.
And also, we call it exploration, is beautiful and everything, but there is underlying this desire to explore is a desire to conquer. I mean, if we're just being really honest about
right now, for us, it is right.
And you're saying it's possible to separate, but I would venture to say that you wouldn't, that those are coupled. So I could imagine a civilization that lives on for billions of years that just stays on its, like, figures out the minimal effort way of just peacefully existing. It's like a monastery.
Yeah, and it limits itself.
Yeah, it limits itself.
It's planted its seeds in a number of places, so it's not vulnerable to a single point failure, right? Yeah. Supernova going off near one of these stars or something, or an asteroid or a comet coming in from the Oort cloud equivalent of that planetary system, and without warning, thrashing them to bits. So they've got their seeds in a bunch of places, but they chose not to colonize the galaxy. And they also choose not to interfere with this incredibly primitive organism, Homo sapiens, right?
Or they, this is like they enjoy, this is like a TV show for them.
Yeah, it could be like a TV show, right?
So they just tuned in.
Right. So those are possible explanations, yet I think that, to me, the most likely explanation for the Fermi paradox is that they really are very, very rare. And, Carl Sagan estimated 100,000 of them. If there's that many, some of them would have been way ahead of us, and I think we would have seen them by now. If there were a handful, maybe they're there, but at that point, you're right on this dividing line between being a pessimist and an optimist.
Yeah.
And what are the odds for that, right? If you look at all the things that had to go right for us.
Yeah.
And then, getting back to something you said earlier, let's discuss, primitive life.
Yeah.
That could be the thing that's difficult to achieve. Just getting the random molecules together to a point where they start self-replicating and evolving and becoming better and all that. That's an inordinately difficult thing, I think, though I'm not, some molecular or cell biologist, but just it's the usual argument. You're wandering around in the Sahara Desert and you stumble across a watch. Is your initial response, oh, a bunch of sand grains just came together randomly and formed this watch? No, you think that something formed it, or it came from some simpler structure that then became, more complex. All right.
not all of which are antithetical to our interests as a species, but I think it's very likely that at least one group is, maybe more than one. And I think they seem to be operating very happily clandestinely. So it's an interesting question to ask, like, by opening up a public discussion, do you sort of invite them in? That seems to be the implication that I'm reading. Maybe you guys can have it. Yeah, so it's like you give it power to enter your world. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I would say that we're really hampered by not discussing this publicly because this is the biggest thing imaginable. We're now in an era where you're never supposed to believe in conspiracy theories. That's considered wrong now, but we're dealing with the grandest of all cover-ups of all time, the UFO cover-up. I can't imagine what is bigger than that. And it is so deeply ingrained into our society. And we're now at a point in this world where we are literally looking at a global fascistic revolution, a digital turnkey totalitarian system that's going all around us. Like, we need to be asking, like, is there any relationship whatsoever between what is going on here and the presence of these other beings? I don't know for sure, but like, this is important. And the fact that not only is the alien part really not being discussed, we're not even really, other than a few people here and there scattered, I think, are really talking about this global totalitarian revolution, which is happening at breathtaking speed. So I think we've got to be getting these conversations out, and we need to recognize that this is very, very difficult because at least in the research that I've had, and I'm certainly not alone here, some of these beings look just like us. They look just like human beings. They may be human beings. Maybe they're humans that work for them. I don't know what they are, but there's certainly a large number of human operators. And so that begs the obvious question, are any of them in our society? Well, you talk around, I know it sounds crazy to anyone who's just traipsing along and finds this show on YouTube, but you go to any significant UFO researcher who's been in this field for a long period of time, and they will tell you the exact same kinds of stories, that there are these human-looking beings, and they are integrating into our society. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. It could be a bad thing. The fact is we just aren't talking about it. So I would always vote in favor of getting this information out, talking about it openly. And it's not going to be a comfortable conversation to have because you'll immediately have a whole array of people saying you are engaging in fear mongering and you're going to be engaging in a new, like, Salem witch trial. Like, there's the alien next door to me. Like, and indeed, like, that kind of craziness can happen. But what if you're in a situation where there really is an unfriendly infiltration that's happening? And I'm not saying that human beings are, we are without our own problems. We have a lot of problems. I mean, we're almost a culture of insanity, but nonetheless, we do have the right to defend ourselves. And I don't know who all these beings are. And I think that it's important that we have a conversation about it.
Great. How about you, James? Do you think this topic becoming more saturated in our zeitgeist will have an influence on how the phenomenon itself interacts and engages our species?
Yeah, I think so, to a degree. I mean, I don't think that our participation necessarily, either prevents or encourages their interaction with us. I mean, I don't think if, like, the entire world is conscious and aware of UFOs, that means that it gives them the ability to influence us more. I mean, and maybe sociologically, but I don't think it's like if a bunch of people become aware of UFOs, they can now enter our world and do what they will, so to speak. Because I know people. I believe Tom DeLonge has mentioned something along those lines. And like the kind of Collins elite ideology is where, like, you're given power to the demons by thinking about them. I know that actually is a real theme that comes up in some fundamentalist circles, and what people call the Collins elite. And I don't think that's the case. I think whatever represents the UFO intelligence is probably several phenomena. At least some of the groups seem to do, they could do as they want, regardless of our awareness of them. And there's certainly probably some groups that have been doing that for thousands of years before we even had the idea of extraterrestrials or angels and demons and so on. So I do think that. They will be responsive in a sense. The UFO intelligence will be responsive to how we go forward with this. And it's been mentioned before, but yeah, I think that some of what's going on now could very well be orchestrated and calculated by them. And that's why we've seen some of these interactions with the military and the nuclear facilities. That could all be part of a long-term, as Richard Dolan's book goes, alien agenda, right? This whole thing could be orchestrated in a sense. Because I don't think that they're just going around prodding, saying, hey, let's see what will happen. I think they have an idea. The UFO intelligence has an idea of what their influence is over us to the extent of when they interact with us. I don't think they're just doing it randomly. There's likely a purpose for it. And they have probably calculated for those responses. So in a way that is them, I don't want to say pushing forward disclosure, but that's certainly a way of them impressing on us in a way that they know that we're going to respond to it, right? So although I think it is going to have an effect, I don't think that it's given to that they can only interact with us if we're aware of them. I think they can do basically whatever they want at any given time. But again, going back to what Rich is saying, I think that definitely the more aware we are, the more open we have this discussion, the better it's going to be on our end, no matter what the scenario is good or bad.
I want to build on what you said because a long time ago, a couple years ago, I came up with an axiom. I don't have it in front of me. Something to the effect of the more advanced a civilization becomes, the less random everything they do is. And I think we can see that with our own civilization. And I extrapolate that. And I realize I'm being a little anthropomorphic here, but I extrapolate that and I apply it to the phenomena itself. I think that what they do probably becomes less and less random the more sophisticated they get with artificial intelligence and various technologies. Now, I recall that Ross Coulthard and Luis Elizondo, both of them recently said that they have learned that the phenomena appears to be more brazen than it has in the past. It's the way it's engaging warships, for example. It seems to be allowing greater opportunity for them to be seen and even documented. And so there seems to be a trend here. And if as some people say, that the phenomena itself are the architects of the cover-up, then they're also the ones that are going to lead to a time when governments simply cannot pretend like this doesn't exist anymore. So I do wonder if there is a timeline that is being initiated by the phenomena itself. And we're seeing that, like in 2020, I think it was, or 2019, excuse me, there were some incursions with the USS Omaha and the USS Russell. In one incident, I think it was the Omaha, there was a spherical object, no less than 6 feet in diameter, traveling right along with the Omaha for a complete hour, brazenly. And then ultimately, because Jimmy Corbell released the footage, it appears as if it entered the ocean and did not destruct. I know that Corbell said that they had a submarine go look for it. They found no wreckage. So that might be an example of a transmedium vehicle or transmedium probe. And there's no indication that any government has cracked that technology on the scale. So that might be a manifestation of the phenomenon being like, we've been around a long time, but we're going to start making it harder for governments to conceal this when maybe previously they were somehow helping governments to cover it up in some weird way. Anyways, Jay, what's your thoughts on this topic?
Oh wow, you just added a whole nother like algebraic level of complexity to the initial question, which I deeply appreciate actually. But I mean, it's tricky. The what Richard and James were speaking to, and you as well. The trickiness of quote unquote non-human intelligence or alien intelligence that actually looks like us or could functionally be very similar to us and integrate with us. That's such a challenging topic as well, because it also has been a source of stigma for many years. And it was, of course, there were some Space Brothers hoaxers and things like that back in the 50s that spoke of human-looking Venusians or whatever. And that idea really fell out of favor so much that it's only even within the last few years, with recent books, that seems to be something that's acceptable to speak about. People don't think about how these cycles of faddishness kind of play into our preconceptions and our biases when it comes to the situation, right? And along those lines, an interesting thought experiment when we're talking about any other beings is like, what is their thinking like? What is their ontology like? And that's getting to your question, Ryan, where it's like, if as people have suggested as thought experiments, what if another civilization is 100,000 years ahead of us? What if another civilization is 1,000,000 years ahead of us? What would that do? What if they've done this whole rollout 100 times before? What if they've done it 500 times before, right? In different star systems or in different realities, universes, however, densities, however we want to think about these like wild ideas, right? And it's quite possible, especially when you consider that the idea that like maybe some of these beings have longer life cycles than we do. So when we get to a position where we say like, oh, the contactees, they were saying the same thing about ecological disaster and how you guys were screwing yourselves 40 years ago. It's like, well, if a being lives, thought experiment, 800 years, maybe 40 years is a drop in the bucket. Maybe that doesn't mean, you know what I mean? What if that's what we look at our pet dogs, they last 10 years and they look at us and they see an immortal, right? And that could be the way that we like may have to look at some other intelligences in terms of like the kind of frameworks. What is a medium-term solution? What's a long-term solution? What's a short-term solution in their situation? And along those lines, when we talk about good versus bad and this kind of white black hat thing, and we talk about when are they going to engage with us more, maybe that has something more to do with when we could conceptualize, just saying possibly the idea that they're just as complicated as we are. And when I think about my neighbor, in the next condo over from here, I don't think of somebody that's either a white hat or a black hat. I think of a person with like complex motivations that have their own life, that's like very gray, no pun intended, but like somebody that has their own lifestyle that is just adjacent to us. And so maybe that is one of the critical components in us actually having an open dialogue with these kinds of other beings, just recognizing that they might have a similar advanced level of complexity and complex personal motivations or cultural motivations like we do.
All right, I'm going to ask a question that a friend of mine gave me. It was such a good question that I'm just going to read it word for word. I would not have thought of it. Does the panel think abductions are dwindling or happening the same now as in previous decades? We don't see much, if any, reporting of, like, no recent books on abduction, only a handful of documentaries. Is this an issue with reporting, or were abductions more frequent in the past than they are today? He's right. As with the contact era, we don't get Adamski's claiming visits to Venus anymore. If any of those contactees were legit, does it suggest the phenomenon stopped at that sort of behavior? Does this mean abductions may have been a phase? Interest in nukes, however, seem like a permanent thing, relatively consistent through the decades. I'm going to go with Rich. What do you think of that? What's your take?
Great question. I mean, a lot of us, we ask this question all the time, like, are abductions dwindling or are they not? And it's hard for me to know. Like, there are some fairly decent, or at least current recent books by some of the abduction researchers. I'm thinking Barbara Lamb and Yvonne Smith, for starters, and they're not the only ones that are still putting out contemporary work. I think Kathleen Martin is too, if I'm not mistaken. Jacob's last book, Walking Among Us, is now almost a decade old, but those cases were not ancient either. So I'm not sure that it's really stopped. However, it's worth considering. There could be a good reason that abductions would be diminishing, which is simply that our own, like if you were an alien species interested in human biology, like for reproduction, you might want more like pure, less toxified versions of people from prior generations. I mean, we've really done some horrible things. I mean, we've got global, or at least near global sperm counts plummeting in the modern world. And I believe there are equally serious infertility problems that women are having as well in much of the industrial world. So if you're an alien looking for specimens to abduct, you may have a harder and harder time. So maybe they got what they wanted, and maybe they could be done. But I don't think that's the case. I still think that there are cases of contact that are out there. On my website over at Rich Members, I've heard from a number of the folks on my site who seem to be having relatively recent contact experiences. So it's hard to quantify that. I would like very briefly to just address the last question you had there, also, Robbie, which was just on, are the aliens themselves promoting a kind of disclosure by letting us see them more? I think I might be inclined to disagree with Lou Elizondo and Ross Coulthard on, at least if they truly believe that these craft are being more brazen than they were in the past. I don't think that's the case. When you look at the history of this, there are some unbelievably up close and personal encounters that people have had, both just ordinary folks and military people, with these UFOs going way back to the 40s and 50s. Some, hair-raising, tremendously traumatic events. What's different is that we have a better ability to record these now. And what's particularly different is in the last 4 years, we've had a faction within our society that's been able to break open the wall a little bit, and so that we're able to get some of this information out. I'm not personally convinced that the ETs or whoever's behind these UFOs, that their policy is any different. It's not clear to me. I think what's a little bit different is that we have more of a three-way for information to pass to the public. But as far as the other side of it, I don't know that there's been any change.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think Coulthard said he had a source or a few sources telling him that, and of course Elizondo said that. I don't know what his sources were. Maybe his tenure at ATIP, he came to that assessment. But anyways, James, what's your take on that initial question?
Well, first, I just want to address kind of what Rich said. And I think part of that really could be, again, like Rich said, we have better sensor capabilities. We have more sensors. We have more satellites. We have better technology to kind of see that kind of thing nowadays. And also, again, the fact now, at the very least, if you don't want to consider from the beginning of ATIP when they're saying, okay, we're looking for this now, and sometimes when you're looking for something, you're more likely to find it. So there could be some of that phenomenon at work too. It's like we're just kind of like there's a story of the Native Americans couldn't see the ships coming because they didn't see, they didn't have the understanding of what they were. They weren't expecting them basically. And if you're expecting something, you're probably going to be more likely to see it. So that's for that end of the question, or what Richard was saying. But as far as abductions, right? So when we're talking about abductions, the meta picture of that is contact, and there still seems to be a lot of contact going on. It's in my opinion, it seems to be the kind of the focus of where we're looking in a sense, because again, like Jay was saying before, there was all the phases of the contactees and these kind of human-looking ET contactee experiences that were very widely reported back then, but you don't hear as much of that nowadays. But again, if you want to talk about the CE5 community or people doing contact work, there's people regularly going out and doing contact work and having different types of experiences. And even if you want to mention like the Bledsoe case, we know that's a recent case where there's a lot of interactions supposedly going on. And even again, the Bledsoe case mentions missing time. So again, with his him having 3 hours, is that an abduction or a contact case where he was on board possibly? So I think that there's still things going on with contact. But one thing that always baffles me about the contact thing is that there's random kind of like phases of like, oh, it's abductions, and then there's no abductions. Like you had Dr. Kit Green saying, oh, there's no abductions, and other people like that, and that always comes up in that circle. And again, I don't know what to make of that. But I think that all this kind of stuff is still going on. Everything between the contact and what people report as onboard experiences, and then you have to also consider what part of those experiences are purely psychic in nature, right? If I can even say that, if it's going on in a consciousness kind of realm, or people actually being physically taken. There's certainly not the focus as there was in the 1990s with, possibly, John Mack, the late and great Dr. John Mack, writing these books, coming from a Harvard professor and going on Oprah. So there was a large emphasis there of, oh my God, because I think at that time, people were like, holy crap, this might actually be real. And there was probably a focus on that. So, and again, getting to what Rich was saying about the DNA thing, people have speculated that the reason that some of the stuff, the contact on that level, CE4's onboard experiences were going on, were because they wanted to study the changes that we were doing to ourselves from, everything we're doing to the planet and our technology and all these chemicals and how it's biologically changing us. And then if you want to complicate the situation even more, John Ramirez recently has been talking a lot about this hybridization thing, which, again, to people just hearing about the subject might sound like, oh my, like out of the box, but people have been really looking into this. This phenomenon has been here for a very long time, and they seem to have some kind of interest. So what if that interest is, actually an involved interest, and if they had some kind of ongoing experimentation or guided evolutionary process thing going on, I would see that as a continual process. So I think it has to do with where people's focus is. But I do always have that same question: is how come you don't hear about the abduction thing as much? And I think again, part of it is stigma, because you had cases like Stan Romanek, for example, which were highly controversial and seemed to have genuine qualities, and then some qualities that could have been fabricated. So again, it's kind of an area that comes and goes and is sometimes really shunned in the research area. And again, now with the emphasis on UAP and these military cases and that thing, there's a lot of focus there. And I think it's good that we are having this talk and emphasizing some of the deeper questions, because I think if there's ever a time that we're going to have a clear look at this is like the beginning of that time.
Yeah, and I'm just going to build on the idea that both of you, I think, touched on, which is that as our technology gets better, we detect these objects more. Well, I recollect that right before the USS Nimitz UFO event series in November of 2004, that their radar systems were upgraded. And the same is true for the 2015 events with Ryan Graves and some other.
For the debate, we're going to have a format where first each contestant, what's the word? Each debater, is it that simple? Yeah. Each debatant will give 10 minutes, then they'll each have 5 minutes to brutally rebut the opponent's conclusions. So start with our token optimist, Josh Hall.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, last year, those of you who attended the workshop, I gave a talk, a paper, and Hugo gave a talk. And Ben stood up, and after the two talks, he said, wow, they really seem to have these totally different things. So when we were putting the program together this time, we thought it might be even cooler if we made it into a formal debate, which who knows. But my major point, and I call myself a futurist as what I really do, and I've been looking at this sort of thing, AI and nanotechnology and a bunch of those things for quite some time, and studying history as a way of getting a background on the sort of things that you can expect in the future. And my notion of what's really likely to happen coming up is something an awful lot like the Industrial Revolution. And it's just the same sort of thing as one of Robin's phase shifts in growth modes. But a lot of the basic truths remained the same before and after. I mean, people were still people, and I claim that our machines will, in some very strong sense, still be people, because they'll be built entirely out of human ideas. And so if we can follow the model of the Industrial Revolution, what happened actually was that after the Industrial Revolution, our lives were much better than they were before. If you compare what it was like to be a medieval serf, you have a life expectancy of something like travel easier and entertainment better. I sense a correlation between New World cultures and a great level of optimism, and Old World cultures and a great level of acceptance of negative scenarios. I give this talk in various countries. I'm just kidding myself, but that's what I say. Okay, so my claim today is that the rise of the massively intelligent machine, I call them artillects, that's artificial intellect, I'm calling them that since the 80s, would be actually catastrophic for human beings in the long term. And by long term I mean the late 21st century, so we're in the beginning of the century, so we still have a lot of time. Leading to a major war, and the most passionate war that we've ever had, ever.
And if you extrapolate up the graph of number of people killed in major wars, the prediction is that it won't be in the millions, it'll be in the billions. So, you know, it really is a negative scenario. I hope I'm wrong, obviously, but, well, we'll see. Okay. Now, if you believe that artillects can be programmed or designed, built, so that they remain friendly to us, even as they become hugely more intelligent than us, then there's no debate. I mean, all my scenario becomes moot, right? So I better clear that away. I'm very cynical of the idea that you can make machines of increasing intelligence above us friendly to us. My great fear is that once they become so superior to us, they may just look on us as ants. It's just irrelevant. And maybe as a pest. And maybe as consciously they wipe us out, or indirectly they do something not caring about us because we're so insignificant. And as a side effect, we just get wiped out. So, there's a lot of risk. It seems to me the key word is risk. So just quickly, a few arguments why I feel that human unfriendly AI is possible. One's sort of intuitive. If you're smarter than the human programmer who put the 3 laws, if you like, the Asimov type programming into you, if you're smarter than that, what's to stop you just sort of looking at this human level programming and saying, God, how stupid. Other arguments? Maybe reaching human level intelligence, perhaps, and just a maybe, perhaps the only way to do that is to use an evolutionary engineering approach, the way I do. How does a being of a finite intelligence X create a being smarter than it? Well, we do it all the time with our children, in a sense, and we do that by sort of rearranging the chromosomes. So maybe evolutionary engineering is the only way. But if you do that, it's incredibly complex. How do you understand it? Well, you don't. It's too complex to be understood, but it functions anyway. We'll have full-blown nanotechnology in the next few decades, and so you put a lot of programming in a very small space, and along comes a cosmic ray. So even if hypothetically you could create an ethical intellect, and you had zillions of them, what's to stop just one stray, aberrant, jet lag seems to a cosmic ray machine that then behaves like a maverick? Okay. You're just being plain wrong. You feel you've made it ethical, but you're just wrong for some reason or another. Like, my background is mathematical physics. In the 30s, John von Neumann so-called proved hidden variable theories are impossible. And then in the 60s, along comes Bell and says von Neumann was wrong. So there's always the oops factor. And even if you could, if a lot of people felt they really could create justifiably, provably ethical creatures, the politicians won't trust them. So you still have a problem. So the politicians typically will take that view. Okay, this most of you probably know already. Presented a little bit last year. These are all things that I think are coming that will make 21st century artillects possible. So Moore's law is predicting by about 2020 putting 1 bit on 1 atom. So then what do we do? 3 atom, should there be an upper limit on their intelligence? Can the rise be stopped? How would we as human beings feel if we became number 2? And should we build these godlike creatures? So I see humanity splitting 3 major philosophical groups. And should we, can the rise be? Could they become smarter? Should there be an upper limit on their intelligence? Can the rise be stopped? How would we as human beings feel if we became number 2? And should we build these godlike creatures? So I see humanity splitting 3 major philosophical groups: the people who want to build them, the people who are against building them, and the people who want to become them themselves, with various names. Okay? And each group has a series of philosophical, political arguments. Cosmos, well, the big picture, the universe, right? We die out in 80 years, but these creatures will be immortal. It'd be almost like a religion, in the sense of philosophical. And the people who, so I see humanity splitting three major philosophical groups: the people who want to build them, the people who are against building them, and the people who want to become them themselves, with the various names. Okay? And each group has a series of philosophical, political arguments. The cosmos, well, the big picture, the universe, right? We die out in 80 years, but these creatures will be immortal. It'd be almost like a religion, the sense of awe and destiny and energy. So you'd be building gods. How do you stop? I mean, how could it be stopped? It's in our genes, in our nature to strive and push and so forth. The economic momentum would be huge. We're talking trillions of dollars. And the military momentum, the time frame we're talking about, if China doesn't change its government fairly soon, then military rivalry between the US and China is worrying. Now the Terrans, they're the people who are opposed to building. Basically, their motive is fear. The key word in the species dominance debate is risk. So how can you be sure that these creatures one day may decide just to wipe us out, whatever? So fear of difference when the guy next to you is a cyborg, and we'll learn French in a minute. So one problem I have with Ray Kurzweil, I just feel he doesn't take sufficiently into account the irrational negative side of human nature. He's just too optimistic. So don't discount this kind of thing. To a Terran, a cyborg and an artifact are not very different. There's so much computing capacity, say, in a grain of sand. So if you add just like one grain to a human brain, then effectively that human is no longer human. So
one more minute to explain what Doom is now.
Okay, so the cyborgs, their argument is become gods themselves, and maybe you can avoid the clash between the groups who want to build and not build. I think that the cyborgs, they'll argue, if everybody at the same pace converts from being human to cyborg, maybe it will work, but obviously that's highly unrealistic. I mean, imagine a mother adds a grain of sand to her baby, newly born baby, and then suddenly the baby's no human, right? So in a sense, she's killed the baby. Or imagine that you're, say, your 60s and your adult children decide that they will go cyborg, and they're no longer human. So you've lost your children. So there's all kinds of emotional baggage.
You wrap up though?
Okay. All kinds of cultural alienations. Everyone's changing, and there's nothing assured. And it's all new. There's enormous scope here for Murphy's Law to react. This is not just hypotheses anymore. Kurzweil and I, there's a BBC Horizon program